Okay, I wanted to talk about some terrible, 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 terrible Ukraine coverage. So Breaking Points has not been the center in the pro-Ukraine sphere, or really in any sphere of talking about the war in Ukraine, for receiving reports or information about the war. But this was sent to me by email and specifically requested by one of my viewers to watch, because they said it was very bad, and they said it just felt like Russian state TV. And I thought they were exaggerating, and I watched a little bit of it, and I won't say it's exactly Russian state TV, but it said everything you would get in a Russian state TV segment, at least when it comes to the substance of it, just not addressing some critical blaring facts. It was pretty bad. But I mean, I wouldn't make the main comparison to Russian state TV. My main complaint about Breaking Points is a lack of effort. Just low effort into research, low effort into understanding the topics that they're talking about, low effort into offering a unique perspective that gives a reason for them to comment on the issue at all. See, if they'd I don't know, if these two had come to Ukraine, got a perspective, came back and then shared it, that's a unique perspective. If these people had some unique data that they went out and they gathered and they wanted to show everybody, that'd be something unique that they were offering. If they had gone out and researched a lot of the different weapon systems and been like, hey, I know that from this interception, the X, Y, and Z, then that would be something that they could offer most Americans, because most Americans don't have that information or don't want to spend the time between their 9 to 5 learning about complex weapon systems and how they work in a war zone. But Breaking Points decided to do none of this and just completely shoot from the hip when it comes to the recent Ukrainian strikes on Crimea. For those of you who don't know, Ukraine has been increasing its rate of strikes in Crimea, taking out S-300 systems, taking out S-400 systems. As of recent, there's a report that even took out an extremely expensive S-500 system, and degrading the air defense there, while also targeting the ferries that the Russians now rely upon in order to transport their military military vehicles, ammunition, soldiers, otherwise, across the strait into the land territory of Kherson to help them continue the invasion. And so they're attacking the storage units, they're attacking the air defense systems, and they're attacking the logistical transport system. The ferries, they've already struck the bridge. So that's why these strikes are happening. And as of recent, they've started using American ATACMS because we approved them using longer range ATACMS systems to do these strikes. These are faster than drones, these are more accurate than drones, and these are harder to shoot down than drones, making them extremely vulnerable. And if they have cluster warheads, it also means that they can spread out their attack over a larger area of space. And that makes them more effective for, say, targeting air bases than traditionally a drone would be, because it can grab more ground, take out more helicopters. One of the first strikes the Ukrainians did when given ATACMS was to strike Russian helicopter bases in occupied southern Ukraine, lessening the amount of helicopter attacks on the Zaporizhia Oblast, which was a great help to the Ukrainian army. It kind of sucked that it was near the tail end of the counteroffensive, but it was a great help. Now they want to comment on one of these strikes where while the Ukrainians were trying to hit targets in Crimea, they were intercepted, and one of the intercepts happened near a beach, and then some of the shrapnel hit the beach. That's what happened. Now, that is not how Sagar and Crystal talk about it. They talk about it in a very different way, making it sound like it was a deliberate targeting of Russian civilians on the beach. Listen to what they have to say.
Lots going on in Ukraine. This was a shocking development that happened just yesterday. Let's go ahead and play some of this video. This was released from the beach in Crimea. These are American missiles launched by Ukrainian military at a civilian beach in Crimea that, according to the Russians, killed women and children. Now, we'll see. The official death toll and all of that has not yet been released. However, we do basically have...
The official death toll was 3, with 151 injured.
have confirmation from the Russian and the Ukrainian side that such a strike did happen, which we will get to. It immediately invited strong condemnation from President Putin. Let's put this up there. He says that Russia, quote, knows perfectly well who was behind the Ukrainian attack on Crimea, and it was not Ukraine, then threatening retaliation against NATO assets all across Ukraine that are there to, quote unquote, training and equipping. Now, one of the ways that you're able to confirm that such a strike happened is that the Ukrainians are bragging about it. Let's put this up there and let's really spend some time on this. So this is from an head of office of an advisor to the office of President Zelensky. Here's what he says, and he says it in English. So let's be clear about who this is targeted to. There are not and cannot be any beaches, tourist zones, and other fictitious sites of peaceful life in Crimea. Crimea is definitively a foreign territory occupied by Russia, where there are hostilities and a full-scale war. The very war that Russia has unleashed for genocidal and invasive purposes only. Crimea is also a large military camp and warehouse with hundreds of direct military targets, which the Russians are cynically trying to hide and cover up with their own civilians, which in turn are considered to be civilian occupiers.
Jesus Christ.
Where have I heard such rhetoric before there, Crystal? And this is the thing.
By the way, the comparison to Palestine, Israel, look, I don't want to get into it yet. Let him talk a little bit more, but there's no comparison because there's no historical analogy to be drawn here. We'll get into it in a second. Not analogous.
Is everyone, all of the Ukraine supporters will be like, what, you want them to fight fairly? And it's like, well, okay, fairly means you're using your own weapons. You're using our weapons now, and you're using it, at least in this case, to openly target, quote unquote, civilians on a beach. Why should we have any confidence, by the way, in your targeting ability if this is what you're using it for?
Oh my God. What I don't like about Sagar is how smug he says things that are incorrect. Crystal says things that are incorrect, but I think the smug level is a little lower. But Sagar is very smug when he says things that are incorrect. But let's just hear that one more time so we just don't get confused.
Civilians, which in turn are considered to be civilian occupiers.
Jesus Christ.
Where have I heard such rhetoric before there, Crystal? And this is the thing, is everyone, all of the Ukraine supporters will be like, what, you want them to fight fairly? And it's
now that's the first thing that just baffles me. What the hell is fair? What does that even mean? Fight fairly in a war. It's a war. They're dead or you're dead. That's how it works. You win the war or you don't win the war. What he means fair, does he mean by the laws of war? There's not like oh, that was too tricky, Ukraine. That's too tricky. You can't do things that are too tricky. Like there's a question about whether it's abiding by the laws of armed conflict or they're not abiding by the laws of armed conflict. Maybe that's what he means by fair. But the Ukrainians bombing occupied territory would be considered fair under any war. I mean, anybody bombing their own occupied territory that is being used as a launch pad for attacks on your country would be considered fair under any circumstances.
It's like, well, okay, fairly means you're using your own weapons.
What does that even mean? Fairly means you're using your own weapons. Okay, I guess the Soviets were not fair when they were fighting the Nazis and they were using American tanks and they were using American trucks. That was very unfair of them. They should have played a lot nicer. That would have been cool of them. Or maybe when the British were using American tanks. Is it not fair when the Russians are using North Korean missiles and North Korean shells to make up for their shell deficit? They were importing Iranian drones in order to launch them into Ukrainian cities. What is this idea that they have to only use their own domestically produced weapons? They're a nation 1/5, 1/6 the size of Russia, with 1/5, 1/6 the size of the population. They were going to need to function off of imports. When we fought wars, we used imports, whether it was World War II, whether it was the Korean War, whether it was other wars. This is, I don't know what he means by you can't use foreign weapons if you want to play fair. It just seems silly.
You're using our weapons now, and you're using it, at least in this case, to openly target, quote unquote, civilians on a beach. Why?
Now, this is the thing that really angers me, because he's saying openly target civilians on a beach. And the only footage they played here, and while it's still footage of the event, it doesn't really show anything at the start here. Let me show you. the footage that they decided to play, it just shows the camera shaking and you don't really know what happens. It's just chaotic, and that's the only 4 seconds they play. I'm going to play you the actual footage from above. Now, not saying that wasn't real footage, but footage where you can actually see something, so you can actually see the strike. Now, I'm not going to show it hitting the ground because that's, you know, when people die, but I'm going to show you the moments before that where you see the spread of the bomb and where it exploded. It exploded above the water, and the vast majority of the clusters seem to be hitting in the water. That's strange. If the target was the beach, then they would have aimed for the beach and would have hit. The clusters would have been whatever. Okay, it is what it is. You know, bombs can fall in a lot of different ways. But the problem is here is that this is footage of an intercept. This is not footage of the bomb just like one, like hitting the target dead on. It was intercepted on way to a target. And the Russians themselves brag, and this is the problem with trying to say this is a deliberate strike on the beach, is that they brag about intercepting the Ukrainian missiles. Meaning that these missiles were headed somewhere, and on the way to their target, they got shot down, and one of them, while getting shot down, exploded in midair, and this was the result. And so then, while exploded in midair, shrapnel and other debris hit the ground, injuring 150 people, killing 3. Now, this seems to point towards the idea that they weren't deliberately targeted, but that the Ukrainians were trying to hit military targets in Crimea, like they've done many times before this, and will do many times after, whether it be the S-200s, the S-300s, the S-400s, the S-500s, whether it be some jets, whether it be storehouses, the ferries, whatever it is, some legitimate military target, and on way to that route, their missile got shot down. But that's not what Sagar says. Even though that's what the footage shows, that's what the Russians say happened, that it was intercepted. The Russians say it was intercepted even. But they were quick to brag, hey, we're protecting the people. We intercepted the Ukrainian missiles. Because they were trying to, because they don't want the missiles to make hit back toward the military targets. It's just on the way to military targets, the only place that you can intercept it to save the military target. I guess for the Russians on this, I can't say it was the only way they could, possible to say, but in this way, they intercepted it over the beach and a lot of people died. Well, 3 people died and 151 were injured. Now, this is still a tragedy that those people got injured. It's still sad that those people died. But to say that the Ukrainians openly, deliberately targeted the civilians here is hogwash. It's nonsense. There's no evidence to it. There's no video evidence. The only video they played doesn't show the full shot, which is publicly available. The only footage they showed was just of a camera just being thrown around. And then Sagar says, oh, it was deliberate. It was a deliberate targeting of civilians. This is just a lie. This is just a lie from Sagar. This is low effort research, low effort reporting, and he didn't put any effort into this. It's pathetic. I don't know what else to say. And what I hate is just smugness that exudes from him as he says that they were deliberately targeted. Like, it's not, if this was just like a random, like, oh, Crimea, the random tourist hotspot getting bombed again and again and again for no reason. It's used as a major transportation hub for the war. It's been the major transportation hub for getting supplies into the south of occupied Ukraine. It has been the major naval hub for the Russians for the majority of the war. It is a major target for the Ukrainians to take back during the war. It's a million different things. But this is not evidence of the Ukrainians deliberately trying to target the Russians. In fact, it looks like, and all the evidence points towards it being an intercept towards another target leading to the deaths of civilians. And let me say, currently, where I am in Ukraine is on path towards major cities like Kiev. And that means that sometimes where I am right now, drones and missiles will fly this way. And the Ukrainian armed forces will try to shoot down those drones and missiles. And I cannot post videos of it. I can't post photos of it. Can't post anything because that would be a security risk. But we've had drones and missile stuff get intercepted very close to where I am right now. Now, if one of those drones, like one got intercepted in the backyard, if one of those drones got intercepted over the house I'm in, and it crashed down and it hit the house and I died. Would it be accurate to report that as Russians deliberately bomb American journalists to murder him? No. Now, you could say that it was still the fault of the Russians for starting this pointless war. You could say that their bombing strategy is one that is reckless. You could do a bunch of things. You could not report it honestly speaking, right? Saying this is someone where this is a real possibility, right? It had close calls before, probably going to have them again. It would not be honest to say that that was a deliberate targeting of Dylan Burns, the journalist. It would be that it was a targeting of another target and it got intercepted, and I was the quote-unquote collateral damage in war. Sad, but that would be the way you would report it. That would be the way to be honest about it. And to say that I was deliberately targeted would suggest that when they put in the coordinates, they chose my house to kill me. Not they hit another target, got intercepted, and it hit me.
Why should we have any confidence? Is everyone, all of the Ukraine supporters will be like, what, you want them to fight fairly? And it's like, well, okay, fairly means you're using your own weapons. You're using our weapons.
Sorry, what a childish way. Could you imagine like Putin calling Biden and be like, this war isn't very fair, Mr. Biden? Like, come on.
Now, and you're using it, at least in this case, to openly target.
Was it fair for the Russians to, invade Ukraine after promising they would and after signing the Budapest Memorandum? Was it fair for the Russians to illegally conscript Ukrainians in occupied territory and deport their children and force them to fight against their own people, which is illegal under international law? Is it fair? Like, I could do this all day. Come on.
Quote unquote civilians on a beach. Why should we have any confidence, by the way, in your targeting ability? If this is what you're using it for, we're the ones who
are ridiculous. It's all, now the rest of this video is going to be built upon a completely false premise. And it's just going to be frustrating because it's just going to be me citing again and again, like, yeah, man, it wasn't a direct target. You're just lying. You're just lying. It's just going to be me repeating the same thing.
Responsible for this. We're paying for it. We're funding it. We're, in some cases, directing it and telling them where all of the targets are. The Pentagon, one of the things that came through in the Discord leaks was the extent to which the Pentagon is basically carrying out and running all Ukrainian ops right here out of Northern Virginia.
That's not what it said. It said that we're giving them a lot of targets and then they'll take the targets and then they'll hit the targets. It's not like we're running all of their ops. That's not true. Certainly, since some of the ops were ops that we don't even like the targeting of like fuel refineries and stuff like that.
And out of European command in Germany. So what we see clearly here is that we are allowing this to happen. We are allowing this to spiral. The Pentagon too.
We are allowing them to bomb territory that's currently occupied after the Russians invaded. Shocker. I can't believe we allowed the Ukrainians to shoot back.
This up there. Just look at their own rhetoric after they were asked. They say Ukraine may fire into U.S. provided missiles into Russia wherever it is, quote, coming under attack. And then here it gets even dicier because this...
Dicier? Where's the video from them constantly be like, I can't believe Russia's bombing Ukraine. Oh my God, I can't believe Russia's bombing Ukraine. Oh my goodness, where's Russia's bombing you? Like, is there like a same outrage that they're releasing on a semi-regular basis about the Russians bombing Ukraine? Like, in war, sorry to say, this is how it usually works. You attack someone and then they attack you back in response. That's how it worked. Have we really cucked ourselves to such a degree as a nation that we expect our allies to bend the knee at the idea of shooting back at the countries invading them? How would we expect the Ukrainians to defend Kharkiv if they can't target the logistics of the offensives, like the logistics that go over the border that is supporting? The Russians knew about these constraints and would take advantage of them. They put their artillery guns right on the border and just bomb the villages again and again and again and again and again, knowing that they can't use some of their best equipment, the Western provided equipment, to target those weapons. And then when we crossed the red line and blurred it into obscurity, what happened? Nothing. So what's the downside? What's the downside in letting the Ukrainians defend themselves fully so they can get the best deal with the best leverage at the table when talks eventually happen? Whether it's a scenario that's better or a scenario that's worse. The more we tie the hands of the Ukrainians, the less leverage they're going to have in negotiations and the worse deal they're going to get for their country.
This is Crimea. Now, look, I'm not saying it's just that Russia, has occupied and has annexed Crimea. I do know that most of the people there consider themselves Russian. So you take that for what it is. I'm not
People that lived there in the 90s when they voted to leave the Soviet Union, voted to leave the Soviet Union, be a part of Ukraine. The Russians invade and they take in like hundreds of thousands of settlers, hundreds of thousands of people leave Ukraine. And then it's like, hey, most of the people here like to be Russian. Okay, what about all the people that were displaced? That's like saying, well, people talk about the West Bank being Palestinian, but I mean, all I know is in these settlements, they seem to be pretty Israeli to me. Like, okay, there's some things that happen that make the, whatever. It's like a lot of vital context deliberately not being in the room. This lack of vital context would come around again later in this conversation.
Going to take a side either way. I am going to say that if you're going to bomb civilian beaches and then claim that it's totally okay with our weapons, we should probably have some say about that. And the crazy thing
again, whatever, I already, what I'm going to say. It's going to be repeating the thing at the start, which we already got through.
That our say is, yeah, that's absolutely and totally fine.
I mean, that statement is so disturbing and perplexing on so many levels. First of all, he says Crimea is definitely a foreign territory occupied by Russia, and therefore, the civilians are quote unquote civilian occupiers and fair game. I thought you also consider Crimea to be part of Ukraine.
Well, yeah, that's right.
You consider these to be like, your people are.
It's fake.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously, like.
They're so stupid. I'm sorry. These two don't know anything that they're saying. They're saying that is a foreign country. It's a foreign country to the Russians. That is their territory. That is not theirs to take over. It is a foreign country. They are allowed to bomb this territory because it's theirs. That's what they're saying. And when they talk about civilian occupiers, and I don't know why this is so hard for them to understand. If they've been paying attention to this war, they would understand this. The Russians moved in hundreds of thousands of people to take over the homes of those who fled in fear once the Russians started making people disappear in Crimea once they took over. Those people who came in and took over those homes, the Ukrainian governments consider them occupiers. They don't think every single person in Crimea is like an occupier. They think the people who moved in over the last 8 years to take advantage of Ukraine's misfortune, they consider them occupiers. Because they don't consider them Ukrainian citizens. They never had Ukrainian citizenship. They're never part of the country, never part of they moved in to take advantage of the chaos, and many instances even stole the homes of those who had fled. It's the same way that, for example, if this is the standard we're going to use, then did the 100,000 to 200,000 people that the Russians just moved into Mariupol, like in the last 2 years, do we now have to all say, okay, yeah, those are citizens of Ukraine. They get to live there forever. It doesn't matter that they took the homes over of tons of dead people or people who had fled. This nuance is not like touched on at all, but that's what that person was saying from the Ukrainian perspective. It's saying it's a foreign country. Crimea is a foreign country. We're fighting to have control of it. It's ours. It's our land. Russians back away. And the people who moved in after it was taken over are foreign occupiers. They're not saying, oh, Crimea itself is a foreign country and we're allowed to bomb it because it's not us and they're all foreigners. It's the complete opposite.
Like, this is the same logic that allows targeting of civilians that not only Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu and co use when they say, hey, we need to talk more about this concept of innocent civilians, or when Herzog says there are no uninvolved civilians. It's their logic. It's the logic of Osama bin Laden. It's the logic of basically, every evil bad guy in history who wants an excuse to murder civilians. And
look, I don't like the idea of really talking about civilian occupiers, period, because even if he's not justifying strikes on civilians or saying it's good to target them or anything like that, because these people are just lying about it completely, neither of these people should ever be taken credibly on this issue. I don't like the language because if it could even be interpreted as a way of saying, like they're in the line of fire. It is true that it got intercepted. They didn't directly target them, but at the end of the day, you shouldn't even be flirting with language that could at all be interpreted that way, period, as a representative of your government. There is something to be said about the morality of moving to occupied territory and setting up on the beach and vacationing as your country bombs the territory and the land of the people you're occupying. It would be like, I don't know, a few years after a native massacre going in and like taking a nice like skinny dip in their rivers and lakes and streams next to their sacred holy grounds, you know, and then the conflict happens and you're caught in the middle. Like, there's a question to be had about the responsibility of the individual here, but of course there is never a good reason to target a civilian.
These are our supposed, you know.
But also, you move to a territory at war that your country's invading, and then war happens. It's not tremendously surprising. But of course, civilian preservation is the #1 priority.
Great humanitarians on the side of the good, you know, the goodness and the light, the Ukrainians with our weapons. And so there's the logical and the moral piece of this is outrageous. And then I'm just,
I mean, if you are dumb and you don't know anything about what you're talking about, maybe, yeah. Again, I would take all the moral grandstanding much more seriously if they put any effort whatsoever into researching or looking into the topics they discuss, but they don't. They don't. So I don't even know how much effort I should put in responding to it.
looking, what are we playing at here? Like, these things have potential consequences that are massive that we seem to continue to sleepwalk into. And I see very little, I see no media discussion, debate.
What consequences? I'm sorry, what's the consequences? The Russians lose another air base? The Russians lose another air defense system? Do we think that one day on the 54th attack strike on Crimea is going to hit a certain storehouse and then Putin's going to be like, and he's going to hit the button and we're all going to die? That's not how it's going to work. It would have to be a crisis that could escalate. For example, an attack strike on Moscow, killing tons of high-ranking Russian officials. That would be something that would be considered an escalation from where we currently are. But if we just keep hitting Crimea over and over again, that's not an escalation. That's just the continuation of the status quo. And the Ukrainians have been hitting Crimea for a long time. They've just started hitting it with our weapons a few months ago. And after months of it happening, we still have yet to see any major response from the Russians.
I see no dissent whatsoever from me.
There's from Crystal Ball and their types. When have they ever sat down and ate the crow over the escalation talk? Always ending up the same way, like a bunch of horse hockey. These lines that are supposedly uncrossable and can never be crossed get crossed, and then nothing happens until they get blurred into obscurity through the crawling forward of these positions. And I got to give some credit to the Biden administration, even though I don't like it a lot of times, that when you slow walk these things, it makes it much harder for your opponent to escalate. Because if you send 1,000 shells and your opponent's like, okay, fine, 1,000 shells, and then you send 1,500, if you threaten nuclear war over that, no one's going to take you seriously because you let 1,000 shells slide. If you allow 10 strikes on Crimea and then the 11th comes and then you threaten nuclear war of it, no one's going to take you seriously because you allowed 10 strikes. Why would the 11th one cause nuclear war? It's like saying I'm going to run into ongoing traffic with a suicide vest. Like, yeah, you'll do a lot of damage, but you're going to destroy yourself too. And for what? Something that you've already seen happen 10 times before? And that's why they slow walked a lot of these things. That's why first it was allowing Western strikes in Belgorod before moving it to Kursk after they attacked Sumy. It's the slow walking because they're basically, Biden does the thing where he takes a step forward. He looks at the Russians, wait for their response. The Russians sigh, then he takes another step forward. That doesn't mean that there's no solid red lines. It just means that the red lines that many pundits and commentators in the alternative media spaces and the mainstream media spaces suggested would be apocalyptic have not turned out to be prophesized correctly.
Mainstream channels about this extraordinarily dangerous policy, which is an outrageous escalation.
It's an outrageous escalation for the Ukrainians to shoot back. Why don't they just sit there and die? I'm a progressive.
Which could have dramatic consequences, right? We don't know where this is all going to end up.
Yeah, you don't know a lot of things. I'm so sassy today, but this is so ignorant.
To act like this is nothing. If the Biden administration announced this policy from the very beginning of like, yeah, sure, have our weapons and bomb Russia or bomb civilians on the beach in Crimea, there would have been at least some like, whoa, what are we doing here? But because
it's again, this is how conflicts progress. This is how escalation progresses in a somewhat responsible manner. She doesn't know it. She doesn't know how to engage in it. She doesn't engage in statescraft. She can't even engage in reporting correctly. by doing research about the topic she's talking about. It is now suggesting that Ukraine is taking some of the most expensive weapons in their arsenal and just slinging it at beaches for shits and giggles to get back at the occupiers with no backing.
Because they've done like the frog in the boiling pot of water and just continually turn up the temp and continue to ship more and more weapons. Oh, we'll do the long range missiles, it turns out. All of those supposed red lines that were set at the beginning, those are all gone now. But since it was done gradually, everyone just accepts it. And
Man, it's almost like it was well thought out policy that allowed us to help the Ukrainians more while avoiding a big escalation leading to nuclear war. And instead of saying, wow, that was really smart, we got to have our cake and eat it too, we got to avoid nuclear war while also supporting our allies, you're instead like, no, abandon them and it won't lead to nuclear war. And hey, maybe that's true, it won't lead to nuclear war now. You know what message it'll send to the Ukrainians? Start an illegal nuclear weapons program tomorrow. There's no way to guarantee your sovereignty unless you have the power to end the world. That's what the South Koreans will learn, that's what the Japanese will learn, and they have already learned pretty brutally. That's what a lot of people will learn, is as long as you've got nukes, nobody can mess with you, and no one should ever give up their nuclear weapons again. Because once the Ukrainians made that sacrifice for humanity, at the first possible moment, we screwed them.
It makes me feel like I'm crazy watching this unfold.
Well, you should be and feel crazy because
Because she is crazy.
What do we hear every single time that the Russians, by the way, terribly, hit infrastructure and kill civilians? Oh my God, these Russian genocidal invaders are killing power station employees. Yeah.
Can we actually, when is the last time Breaking Points did they cover the Kharkiv mall attack? Mind you, the Kharkiv mall attack killed 18 people and it hit directly the mall. It wasn't intercepted. It hit the mall. It targeted the mall. It killed all the people in the mall. And then they claimed that it was a military target when it totally wasn't. Like, there was no evidence of being a military target. And there's been a ton of instances like this. So, but I'm sure that they have obviously covered that, because this led to like 3 deaths. That led to 18. And since they talk about the proportionality when it comes to Israel and Palestine so much, I understand that this, of course, would be not covered at all. Doesn't look like they covered that story. Well, that's very unfortunate. I'm sure, though, they covered all the other ones.
Yeah, it's bad. It's terrible.
Right.
A missile went off and hit a park in the middle of Ukraine, and a child was killed. Awful, right? And that's part of the moral high ground.
I like it that when the Russian missile hits a park, it just went off. When the ATACMS gets intercepted on a way to a target near a beach, they targeted the civilians on the beach.
Which they play into, and why a lot
Listen to the nuances of how language is used here. It's beautiful, isn't it?
That's part of the moral high ground which they play into, and why a lot of Americans still have a lot of sympathy for them. But now you're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's not the exact same thing. You can't claim that bombing air defense systems and weapon storage units and having those get intercepted is the same thing as Bucha, was the deliberate filling of mass graves, or Izium, the largest mass grave uncovered since the Yugoslav genocides. Or, for example, the drone campaign against civilian infrastructure, which rammed into civilian infrastructure, wasn't intercepted over civilian infrastructure, that they went and hit civilian infrastructure. The deliberate targeting of the electrical grid before the winter. These are not the same things as what is being compared to here. If he wanted to make this comparison, he'd have to talk about Belgorod. He could talk about, like, wait a second, what about these shellings? And you could find real instances where you could be like, man, I don't think the Russian Volunteer Corps, maybe they should. Like, you could find that stuff. This is not that stuff.
Terrorizing civilians in Crimea, allegedly, by the way, your own citizens, or are they not? Are they citizen occupiers? What are we talking about here?
Right.
Again,
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly either of you were talking about.
and shows the farce of that whole.
Shows the farce of Ukrainians wanting back Crimea, he says, with no knowledge of what was even being said, responding to a point that was never made. Head ass.
Situation. And then, not to mention all of those border towns, which they have used drones and now our weapons to target into, they are, free. It's like a free fire zone. You think they're doing a good job in terms of their targeting? I go on Telegram every day and watch the videos of the fallout from these things. There's civilians who are killed all the time. Now we're basically just doing what they are doing. So then what?
This, again, he's basing this off all on a false premise to extend to the idea that all are moral equals. The Ukrainians and the Russians are all the same. The Russians may have invaded Ukraine. They may have filled the largest mass grave since the Yugoslav genocides. There might be mass graves so large outside of Mariupol that extends to the length of 70 to 80,000 corpses, according to the Associated Press. But see this intercept? They're the same thing. They're the same thing.
What are the Russians going to do? The people with superior manpower, nuclear weapons, they're just going to take even more of the gloves off. And they're like, okay, forget it. You know, we're just going to go all out. Who is?
I hate when people say this because it suggests that the Russians have been holding back. That it's like they're like Russia is like Frieza, and every time he gets matched, they just like Frieza level up like to like I'm Frieza 4. This is Russia Form 2. This is Russia Super Saiyan 3. Like. That's not how it works. It takes time for you to get your engines going, but like Russian shell production is not going to double again. Not going to double again. They don't have endless shell production. They don't have an endless population. Russia's already in a demographic crisis before the war. And due to the sanctions and the leaving of jobs, a lot of people fled the country. And I mean, they're barely doing enough to sustain current losses in their meat wave assaults. In order to expand the war, they would have to do something akin to mobilization, if not mobilization, verbally, publicly announced, which would be very unpopular. It's the one time Putin's popularity went down in this war is when he announced mobilization. A lot of Russians would rather passively, apathetically, more passively support the war than pick up a rifle and go get killed in the Donetsk region, especially with the loss rates that they're taking. But I mean, the idea that the Russians can just endlessly like crank up the heat, if that's true, then they wouldn't need the North Korean imports. There wouldn't be discussions of North Korean engineers. They wouldn't need to stoop to that level. So it suggests that the Russians are having to really stretch out to crank it up, so to speak, as Sager's saying. I'm not saying they can't do worse things, like take as many cluster bombs as possible, just lob them at cities or something. But the idea that the Russians are just like, oh God, if these pesky Ukrainians keep acting up, then the Russians might start a war. You know, it's kind of silly.
Who's going to bear the brunt ultimately? It's the actual people who are caught in the middle, the actual civilians, allegedly who the Ukrainians are trying to liberate and save, except not really, because now they're literally going to kill them. I mean,
he's such a smug prick, dog. My God, man. It'd be so much better if he just made the point kind of like non-aggressively, passively, not with this just, why? Oh, they're going to liberate. I guess those people in Mariupol, none of them want to be liberated. I guess all the people that we know in occupied, none of them really want to be liberated because Ukraine doesn't really think of them as civilians because one bomb got intercepted, you fool, because they're going to go there and they're going to start their own mass graves. Look how quickly this one misunderstanding of this instance has turned them into, oh, this isn't a liberation war. The Ukrainians and the Russians are just the same. And all the people in occupied territory are not actually going to be liberated because then when they get liberated, they're going to get shot and they're going to get killed. And it's just ridiculous. They've completely built an entire house of cards of nonsense about Ukraine off a completely false premise. Look how much they're developing themselves and building themselves up in their audiences to dislike Ukraine based off of complete fallacy that they've built up.
I mean, it's just the whole thing is a joke. It makes
like all they had to do was Google the bombing. All they had to do was Google like intercept or not intercept or look at the other footage. All they had to do is to like, oh, what does he mean by civilian occupier? Oh, did people move into Crimea since what is like most of the problems that they're running into here could have been fixed by a quick Google search. In fact, I already know this. Want to know how I know this? Here's it being reported on about the intercept and Russia saying in this article. Let me read this to you. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed 5 U.S. supplied attack missiles were used in an attack, 4 of which were intercepted. They're admitting to the interceptions, with a 5th exploding mid-air. Why would it explode mid-air? On way to a target. Maybe because it was intercepted too. And hey, if you think, oh, well, that's Kiev Independent. Are they likely to read the Kiev Independent? Here's Wikipedia on this specific strike. Interception in big text. Okay? I hate to be a Wikipedia cuck, but I mean, like, just Google it. Just Google it.
Everything much more dangerous for us. Already, Putin saying that he is going to target NATO assets. You know, the rhetoric right now coming out of Russia is terrifying. Everyone's like,
yeah, it's been terrifying for 2.5 years if they're going to nuke the world.
Oh, they've been saying it for 2 years. Only needs to go bad once. At the meantime,
Wow, brilliant. Okay, well, guess we should just cave because of scary rhetoric on all of these security issues that we care about.
by the way, I couldn't help but flag this one. Jake Sullivan and the White House bragging. Let's put this up there. The U.S. will fund the printing of more than 3 million textbooks, Crystal, for Ukrainian students to use in the coming school year after Russia escalated its attacks on Ukrainian printing facilities, which were used to print Ukrainian propaganda. Russia struck that largest printing house in Kharkiv just last month. Jake,
What does he mean that was used to print Ukrainian propaganda? What is he defending the bombing of Ukrainian printing houses? What dog? Okay, I was wrong. This is just state TV now. This is just fucking Russia Today. What the fuck? Dude, they printed textbooks for children. There are authors that got their stuff printed there all around the world that were like making messages like, hey guys, we were going to print these books at this printing house, but it got blown up by the Russians. By the way, the targeting of literature is of culture like that is a sign of like genocide. And I would say that like coming out here be like, oh my God, the American government wants to help them with textbooks for their children. I guess, you know, an American textbook that says, we believe in freedom and democracy. I guess that is propaganda, you know? Would they talk about that similarly about us? Oh, we printed school textbooks for children. Things that said the Constitution had some good ideas. Propaganda. Come on. What is the standard we're holding the Ukrainians to?
Sullivan puts this out basically with no like read of the U.S. domestic context, and is bragging about how this is an effort to prop up Ukrainian civil society and how this demonstrates like U.S. will and resolve in backing Ukraine. We're paying their janitors. We're printing their textbooks.
They blew up a printing house. What's wrong? Out of all the things we want to, okay, to be clear. Can't send Ukraine weapons, can't send Ukraine textbooks. Is it literally just, we don't care what commitments we made to you, screw you, die, go die quietly so we can concentrate on trans books, so we can all have our big debate about woke Blues Clues?
And look, I agree it can be trite sometimes of like we're spending all this money over there and we're spending all this money over here, or not spending any money over here. But in this case, it's actually true. Where I grew up, Texas, College Station ISD, I remember my textbooks were falling apart. I asked, apparently most people, you know, they still have that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot about those like big airstrikes on the Texas printing houses. Yeah, the difference is they can't make textbooks anymore. We can. They can't because they're blown up and they're literature targeted. Out of all the things you can be complaining about USA doing, giving books to children, I love the conservative family values. Like, the complaint here shouldn't be that we're giving books to Ukrainian children. Your complaint should be, hey, I think either Texas state budget, if that's the state government's responsibility, or a more federal budget should be allocated towards the procurement of these goods. Not, hey, why are we helping them when we should... Like, I never like this. Why can't it never... I hate when these points are made. Why can't it just be, yes, let's help these people as their literature is getting targeted, and we can also buy textbooks for our own children.
Kids are getting brand new textbooks on behalf of the U.S. taxpayer. What's happening here? If you're
I can't wait for Crystal Ball to come in and be like, hey, actually, Sagar, as a progressive and as a humanitarian, I do think Ukrainian children should be allowed to read books.
Trouble, your kids or whatever, you're paying tons of money in property tax, etc., and you're watching 3 million Ukrainian kids get free books from the U.S. taxpayer.
Those dirty, grubby, greedy Ukrainian children. Oh God, they're gonna be reading at a 5th grade level.
How do you feel about that? It pisses me off. I think it should.
Yeah. I think there is a real sense of like, okay.
Oh my God, is she progressive? Is she progressive? Really? Is she? Does she care about like Palestine? Does she care about foreign affairs? Is she like the type of people like, I don't care about Palestine, I just want to talk about the union? Like, is like what, like, does she give a care at all what's happening anywhere else in the world? Is she progressive? Is she supposed to be the progressive on the show? Is that what her stance is supposed to be? Yeah, I also think the Ukrainian children are getting too many textbooks from the US government. That's my issue here. Oh, when I heard that those children, after the printing house was bombed and their literature was targeted, as the Russians are literally trying to grind the Ukrainian language into dust, I thought, US aid could be doing something better.
Guys legit are more committed.
What shows, so is the policy then US aid should do nothing until we fixed all of America's domestic issues? Is that Crystal's official policy?
To the populations of Ukraine and
It's
Israel
true,
here, and it's just hard to disagree.
True.
It's really hard to disagree.
It's easy to disagree. It's so easy to disagree, Crystal.
You see where the money goes, when you see where the focus and attention goes.
What do you mean, dude? I hate this. I hate this. Honestly, I hate both of these people. Through 10 minutes, they have made me despise both of them. I talk to them, either of them, any day with no fear in my eyes, any day of the week. But this is despicable. When you see where the money is going, this is the problem. It's just a screw them over. They gave up their nukes. They gave this contribution to humanity. We made promises to them. Screw them over. Be the snaky, weaselly, slimy American the whole world wants you to be. And screw them over once again. It's not about where the money goes. It's about the money going anywhere to the Ukrainians, period. That's what it feels like now. Oh, it goes to weapons? That sucks. It goes to aid? That sucks. It goes to textbooks after the Russians blow up their printing houses, target their language? Oh, that's too much too. Oh, so what are we supposed to do? Is our only policy solution from these two just screw them over, let Russia take as much as they want, and if the Russians invade again, tough shit, they have nukes, that's how the world is? Welcome to big boy time? Like what? I am aghast. I am flabbergasted. It's becoming harder and harder to make points. And the fact that they're now using a fake instance they've built up of targeting civilians. They have not proven that's used to target civilians. That the evidence points in the other direction, that they were targeting something else and then got intercepted. They then built this up to advocate against Ukrainian children getting U.S. provided or supported textbooks after their printing houses were blown up.
You see where the John Kirby up there getting into tears about what's going on in Ukraine. When's the last time you saw a U.S. official in tears about something that was happening to someone here?
Literally.
Crystal, when does she care about Palestine, or is she like, I don't care about those Palestinian children? Those Palestinian children are like, yeah. If I looked up Palestine on Breaking Points, or I looked at her record or see what she's debated, I have a strange feeling from what I remember. She's actually pretty passionate about us not sending weapons over to Israel anymore and to slaughter the Palestinian children. So why do you care so much about those Palestinian kids? Why? Don't you know they're foreign? Like, what is this? Ukraine is not aesthetically pleasing to support as a certain type of leftist. And it certainly isn't aesthetically pleasing to support as a certain type of populist, right? And if you're pro-Ukraine in those groups, you're going to get a lot of heat, going to get a lot of shit. But if you're that certain type of leftist, fine to support Palestine. That's okay. But a populist right? No chance. No chance. And so instead of having two people who are going out there, and this is what I believe really, going out there, researching this genuinely, putting real effort into this, we got two people doing surface level, below surface level work. Like, they could have just found one more camera angle and found out it was intercepted. Instead, they decided that they weren't going to do that. They were just going to call it a war crime, and they were just going to move on and use it as a basis to advocate against it. And look how many people like this. 2.8 thousand people. Look at these people. Blame Hamas. They were on the beach using Russians as human shields. If our elected politicians do not care about our lives, then why should we care about theirs? I can't afford an inhaler. Who is doing the targeted? U.S. provided the GPS targets. Fund textbooks with U.S. instead of wars for our lands. Pathetic government. All built off a false premise.
Or were they, called an emergency session of Congress to make sure we pass funding to make sure people here have health insurance or childcare or any number of other things that Americans, housing.
What about fentanyl?
Really
I'm so proud of Crystal. One day she'll succeed and she'll stop the aid to Ukraine. And so the children everywhere won't be reading textbooks. Congratulations. And it'll be great because then they'll have deeper mass graves, and we will also have none of our solutions solved, none of our problems solved. Yay, progressive victory.
up with,
You know how many
right?
people just died last week of fentanyl. It's insane. I was
Yeah.
just looking at some of the stories coming out of Los Angeles and
It
stuff.
always has to be a competition. These people died of fentanyl, so screw them. You can deal with two issues at the same time. Do you think America's so pathetic we can't walk and chew bubble gum?
Francisco, this is horrific stuff right here in the USA. They don't care.
And then, you
Yeah.
know, just to take it back to like
Yeah.
the APAC block and what we were just talking about there, even like the money that's being spent and the focus and attention in elections is on, he has wrong think on our policy vis-a-vis a foreign nation, as if that's just so outrageously out of the bounds of discussion and conversation in American politics. It really is wild. It really is priorities turned upside down. And
We need to really have a conversation about having a conversation.
you know, this is sort of, I think this is a very bipartisan and correct sense of the priorities of Washington. And then even beyond that, it's just,
I can't believe that Washington, D.C. is invested in the largest war in Europe since the Second World War and the largest war going on in the entire world. What should national security people be involved in? If not being worried about the largest wars in the world.
we're playing such a dangerous game. We're playing such a dangerous game and just hoping we can continue the provocations and Putin's just going to continue to bluff.
Firing at invading troops is provocative. That is the progressive viewpoint I'm supposed to believe in.
And never actually make good on the threats. And that's quite a bet to take. And for what? For what? Like,
These Ukrainians, these spooky Ukraine. I didn't know what Ukraine was until 2 years ago, and now I'm supposed to care.
what is the plan here? Where is this going? No one can tell you because there is no plan. The plan is just to muddle through, hope it stays the same, hope Joe Biden can get himself reelected, and then figure it out on the other side. The last thing I'll say here is, you know, with regards to the strike on civilians in Crimea.
To be clear, the plan is to beat the Russian army, beat them back so they stop invading and trying to conquer Europe.
And describing them as quote unquote civilian occupiers. I do think that Israel, I don't think they put out this statement if Israel hadn't, you know, just gotten away with bombing civilians over the course of 9 months.
Right.
Oh my God, man. They have to connect all these issues together, no matter how haphazard and how much it doesn't work. But you gotta connect it. You have to connect somehow. Hey, sorry to say this, but like water was cut off to Crimea in like 2014, 2015. The idea that the Ukrainian government has just become oppositional on this idea, or they're not willing to make the peninsula pay in some way, or at least the Russian administration of the peninsula pay, is not a new concept, and it wasn't inspired by the Israelis. And intercepts against Russian missiles were not invented by the Israelis either. So, sorry, you can't blame this one on Israel.
And justifying it, and the U.S. press covering for it, and the Biden administration obviously covering for it and continuing to ship those weapons, et cetera. Because how can anyone in the Biden administration say like, oh, you can't use this rhetoric and this is wrong, et cetera, when, okay, well, what about your good buddies over here in Israel? So that's the way that, you know, when these things get...
By the way, can I just say, the Hill is crap. Is this no longer like a Hill program? Is this like still Hill? Is this still the Hill? It says it's just breaking points now. But like, is this really like, if this is still the Hill, is this what they want their flagship program to be? Should there be no fact checking whatsoever? Like no corrections, just, okay, whatever.
Justified. It's not, it doesn't stay localized in Gaza, right? Where we see that with the potential expansion of the war into Lebanon too. The bombing and targeting of civilian infrastructure, the massive death of civilians, the starving of civilians, all these things have been normalized now. And other leaders around the world are paying attention. We have zero moral high ground to stand on now and lecture anyone about humanitarianism, democracy, human rights, or any of the rest.
Again, every conflict is morally gray. No good guys, no bad guys, nothing to fight for. View history passively. Doom, 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 doom.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come back and bite us, and it already has. So, hey, if you like that
We
video,
haven't lost a single U.S. soldier in Ukraine. Every single second of that was pathetic. I have nothing else to say. Stop lying about Ukraine. Stop lying about Ukraine. Stop lying about Ukraine. Oh God, that was painful. That was hard. That was hard to watch, honestly. That was worse than I could have imagined. Really bad. Really bad. But I mean, like, they're literally just repeating like the Medvedev line. Ugh.